listening to Inclusive AF with Jackye Clayton and Katee Van Horn.
Hi, Jackye.
Hi, Katee. How are you doing in Arizona? It has to be what, 200 degrees?
It's about 200, but I want to actually have you refer to me as the crazy cat lady. Actually, the crazy cat and dog lady, or single, whatever my name is now. Yes.
Actually, I think it means doesn't care about America, childless.
Yes.
Pet owner.
That's right.
To be
That's
more
right.
inclusive. Yes.
Hi. But all of those things, but still has a vote.
But it doesn't count, I think, allegedly.
But it doesn't count. Yeah, it doesn't count as much as yours because you have babies. So
That's right.
no, yeah. Yours, well, I think actually yours counts as double because you have babies, but then they take some away because you're not white. And so, it's a whole thing. There's a lot of math involved with JD Vance. So
2024 has been great.
So far, so good.
Welcome to the Inclusive AF podcast.
Oh my God. Okay. So with that great intro, Jackye, how is everything going for you today?
I have to say every morning that I wake up is a good day. It's gonna be a good day. But I can tell you, like, it really has felt like the Twilight Zone lately. It has been surreal. Those of you who've listened to our last episode, and we were talking about people going back on their word and then going back on their go back is happening. We're seeing some things. But I would like to tell everybody, this has been after the first week after Kamala Harris was announced that they were going to be the Democratic nomination. And this week we have seen Southeast Asian for Harris, white women for Harris, white dudes for Harris, the women for Harris. The boule has been activated. And I have to imagine, if you don't know boule, Google it. But I have to imagine some of the DEI training that we have been doing in the last couple of years actually sunk in, because we've never seen anything like it. And so we have to give a little bit of a clap to all of our DEI practitioners that had to work through that, because it sunk in. For the first time, we saw people saying, yeah, we are white dudes and that's okay. And we can still support Harris and we need to help together. And the other part that has been giving me hope has been people saying and recognizing that once again, we're asking all of these Black women to come in and save the situation that happened so many times. For people to acknowledge that in the world has been great. Now, if they could start acknowledging that at work a little, we're getting closer though. But North Star, right? That's a North Star goal. We will get there. I have hope after this week.
I will tell you, I was on the White Women for Harris call, and that was repeated probably 5 or 6 different times by pretty much every speaker, acknowledging the fact that Black women help us to organize this. Black women helped us to get here, and exactly what we're saying, the burden that we've always put on Black women, we need to acknowledge that. And also we need to come together. But I want to keep this conversation going, but I also want to introduce our guest. So Christina, would love for you to introduce yourself and share a little about who you are, all that good stuff. And then we can continue talking politics if you'd like, or wherever else we want to go.
Yeah, so I'm Christina Blacken. I live long walks in the beach. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and originally from Utah, which is a long conversation for another day, but I've been in New York City for 14 years. And I run a company called The New Quo, which does leadership development and behavior change work, really focused on using neuroscience and narrative techniques and equity principles to help people build deeper trust and collaboration in their relationships. And I've mostly worked with corporations, nonprofits, and universities. And over the last 5 years, I've trained 14,000 leaders across 9 industries. And I've designed a change model, which essentially helps people to disrupt automatic patterns of negative stories when it comes to bias and change and difference, so that they can, navigate change in a more effective, aspirational, and collaborative way. And we're in a time right now where we need some of that more than we ever have. And seeing all the news and the hope scrolling I've been doing the last week with seeing the new narratives and stories that people are creating about the future of democracy and how we can collectively organize and how leadership is something we all can take a part of has been really affirming to me. And I'm hoping that just leads us to better outcomes, because we need them. We're in unprecedented times. I'm like, when does it stop? As a millennial, I've been unprecedented since 9/11 at least. It's been unprecedented for how many decades now? So it's interesting to see where things are going to evolve.
Absolutely. So I want to touch on what Jackye just said and say 14,000 leaders. So you are part of this change, and you are part of, the work that is happening now, and the kind of everyone coming together and actually acknowledging that we need to come together to make good happen and to beat down evil. And I don't know how else to describe that, because it truly is just evil that we're seeing and that we're facing right now. So the new quo, first of all, where'd you come up with that name?
I was sitting at a lunch with an ex of mine. This was in like 2014. And I kept saying, oh, the thing I want to build is about changing the status quo and how we're essentially approaching it, what we're thinking about it. And we were throwing words around. And I think he was the one that said the new quo, possibly. And I was like, wait, that's got a little ring to it. The new quo? Okay, because we're about changing things and we're creating this new status quo. And I quickly Googled to see what websites, because you always got to check the URLs. People be squatting on the URLs.
Yes.
It was available. And so I grabbed it right away. And that was all the way back in 2014, at the earlier stages of my career before I was an entrepreneur. So yeah, it just stuck. And it's always been a pretty accurate expression of the things that I care about and the work that I want to do in the world, which is helping people to understand the status quo is changeable. And usually storytelling is one of our fastest ways to do it.
Now I'm going to ask a question, totally off topic. We'll get back because it was in your bio. Why do you know so many ways to use Jell-O? I don't want to forget.
Jackye, I wanted to know too. We need to
I can't. And we'll get into it in a second. So
this is probably an old joke about Utah, but Utah at one point, the state food was Jell-O. And I think it was because of the amount that people were consuming. I don't know if it's just like a cheap and malleable food for big families or something, but we had for a long time, we were like the top consumers of Jell-O in the country. And so I used to make fun of that because I would show up to like classmate events and people would have these wild looking Jell-O casseroles with savory pieces and stuff in them. And I'm like, I love creativity, I love DIY, but this is going too far. We're pushing the limits of what we should be doing with our food right now. But it's just kind of a funny nod to the quirkiness of different parts of the culture that's in Utah. I don't know if they're still consuming Jell-O as much as they did, but I'm gonna probably keep saying that till the day I am no longer on this planet, because I just thought it was funny.
I think it's funny. And at some point offline, we'll get more into the conversation with Jell-O now. We'll bring it back.
Well, I'm thinking, so I come from a big Catholic family, and I think we had a similar situation where it was, what Jell-O can do and what you can add to it to make kids eat it, so I think it's absolutely that, like the big family piece is definitely a part of that. But so when you think about, kind of the work that you are doing and how you actually change the story or help people tell their story, what are the things that come to mind, or what are the things that really help people that are new to this work or people that are new to thinking about equity and inclusion and how to kind of frame that in their own heads with their own story?
That's a really great question. I really start with the concept that leadership is just the act of storytelling around goals. And then when people understand that, they're like, well, I'm doing that all the time. Because you tell stories constantly. I think the stat is 65% of all of our daily communication is through story, whether it's with family or friends or lovers or coworkers, you're always using stories to model change and to demonstrate events and experiences. And so I start there of you have stories you're already telling, and which one of these stories are helping you to move things further along and to create better understanding and trust? And which of these stories might be getting in the way of your beliefs around leadership and power? Because we all have sets of narratives we picked up from family and media and education and schooling. And some of those can be inaccurate and not necessarily the full picture of history or culture and how it works. And so I help people to really examine first their self-narratives. So what are the narratives they believe about leadership and power, where they come from? How are they showing up in their current decision-making and goal setting and communication? And then also getting them to attune to other people's stories and ask better questions so they can have a better picture of the people they're interacting with. Because typically we project whatever stories we believe onto people based on their appearance, how they carry themselves, how they speak, what they may wear. And those stereotype stories can really create a lot of issues in groups, as we know. And so I walk people through that model. It's sort of what I call it is awareness, attunement, and then action. So how do you have awareness of your own stories? How do you attune to other stories? And then how do you create a new narrative and vision around goals in a group so that everybody feels bought in, like they're actually being delegated and improved and sort of supported in the right ways? And then using that process over and over again, because stories are always being developed and made. We have this automatic process in our bodies, probably from evolution, of just putting things in a narrative format so we can recall them and pass them on. And so that process is always ongoing, and we can refine it and get better at it and use it as a tool for better understanding and collaboration instead of disruption and negativity, which we see right now in the political sphere. There are people who are using narrative to spin lies, to create myths, to further perpetuate stereotypes, which leads to measurable, pretty significant loss in terms of life, in terms of trust, in terms of resources. So getting people to do the positive side of storytelling, which is self-insight, awareness, and then persuasion, is really the work that I'm doing. And teaching people that anybody, regardless of title, status, appearance, has power through the types of narratives they create around their ideas and their goals.
I think that's really important. A lot of times when we're talking about imposter syndrome, but then when we talk about imposter syndrome, but then for Black and brown folks, a lot of times it can be internal stereotyping of themselves based on the narrative that they've been fed, based in their communities. So I was curious, how, when you get started, imagine there are some people that may not realize that they have some of these stories. Like, how do you help navigate that piece, like with the self-identification or self-awareness within stories?
I think practice is really important. So a lot of my trainings, I design them to be engaging and dynamic and entertaining, and also in real time, they're practicing the concepts. So one of them is essentially learning about the story of other people's names. And when they're doing that in real time, they're kind of examining some of the assumptions and ideas they may have attached to people they've known for a very long time. They're like, I didn't know this fact about the history, and your family chose this, and your ancestry is that. And I learned all of that from this simple question of learning the story of your name. And so in my sessions, I really want people to practice things in real time, because the challenge a lot of the time in equity work is it feels very abstract, and it feels like it's an external thing. And it's like these boogeymen and these bad people, but really it's a process of personal development. So how do you become more conscious and aware of the ways you show up in conversation, the ways that you know, interact with people, and then do it in real time as you're learning the concept. So they're like, oh, wow, okay, I get that. If I ask more meaningful questions and I'm more curious and open, I can learn stories about people and also examine my own before I make decisions, before I move to the next step. And so I see that being the most effective. Like an example is I did a project with Nextdoor, which is a large social media platform. They hope to connect neighbors across the country. And they had gotten a lot of backlash around people profiling their neighbors on the platform. They'd be like, hey, who's that Black man in a sweater? They're like, Karen, that is your neighbor who has lived here for 40 years. Why are you acting scared? And so they were really concerned, like, how do we, you know, arm our moderators with techniques and tools to, you know, manage conversation in a more effective way? And some of the pieces of the training that I designed that we ran for 3 years was them examining self-stories around how do they react to change and difference, and how does that affect how they moderate content, and also what are some tools to de-escalate microaggressions and conflict. And we got a lot of really great feedback where people are like, this is the first time I've ever thought about how am I affecting this issue, and doing it in a way that feels aspirational and positive versus shameful, where it's like, oh, I can show up in a better way and create a neighborhood that feels more civil when I'm conscious of how I'm entering these conversations, what I'm bringing to them, and how I'm also moderating them. And so I think connecting that piece of your inner stories can help create better outcomes versus shaming people is such a powerful step, because most people avoid the work because they're afraid of shame and they're afraid of blame. And it's like, it's not about shaming and blaming. It's how do you reach your fullest potential as a leader, as an individual, by examining those stories that might get in the way of how you interact with people, and doing it in a way that doesn't feel like it's a detrimental labeling thing. Like all of us can do that work, no matter what our backgrounds are, no matter what we look like.
I agree with you. And I feel like so many people do feel that shame and blame. And it's interesting because that's part of the narrative. And I think part of why we've seen such a backlash, I mean, there's a million reasons, it's not just one, but part of it has to do with, you hear of that shame and blame, or you don't like America, or you are making us feel bad because we're white and men or straight, and now it's all of our fault. And I think that's why that was like so powerful this past week when you saw people like sitting in their identities and being able to be like, no, we're not, nobody's shaming you. It's like you're bringing up these things of um where it is. And I feel like it's interesting that you said, I love the example of next door because we were working with moderators that were dealing with neighbor, like it wasn't even their neighborhood. Like it wasn't them doing it. Like but they had to get on top of it before you see like a full riot because of profiling on this app. I imagine that people were really surprised of how did they internalize it. What was something that, what do you think was the best outcome of that? And what do you think was one of the shocking things that you might have picked up on, maybe any surprises that came out of those 3 years? And as much as you can share, I don't want you to share any.
Leading a growing business, it's like building a plane while flying it. Team building, decision making, and scaling all at once. At CPO Playbook, we get it. That's why our podcast, ranked in the top 10% worldwide, tackles the toughest leadership challenges with insights to help you lead smarter and grow faster. Tune into the CPO Playbook podcast because leadership doesn't come with a manual, but we're pretty close.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things is their moderator model was actually by volunteers. So the people who first started their neighborhood forum became the lead moderator first, and then they have internal moderation teams that then check the content from there. And so most volunteer moderators, one, didn't feel like leaders. So that was interesting, where they're like, I don't know what impact I'm going to have. It's just little on me. I don't think I can really step in and manage this. So there was a significant shift in people feeling actual leadership, like, oh, I have a way I can make an impact, even as someone who doesn't normally consider myself a leader. And I think that shift is important because we have this old antiquated narrative that leadership is about title, status, appearance, a certain amount of money. So people felt more commitment and accountability to leading change in their neighborhood conversations. The other part that was fascinating to me, so we had around 43,000 people sign up for it, and about a third completed the full training. And half of them were moderates and conservatives, which was shocking to me because it was by volunteer. They weren't required to do the training because this is a volunteer moderation role. But I was surprised that, people who aren't already kind of bought in to the idea of equity were like, let me see what this is about. How am I going to be more of a moderator and somebody who facilitates respectful conversation? So I think because it was positioned as, we all want the outcome of a respectful civil neighborhood where we feel safe, and everybody can agree on that. And the tools to get us there is to learn how to reduce the ways that we might have bias in our conversations, the ways that we might show up in these instances so we can have better outcomes. And so I think that was appealing to people I didn't expect, quite honestly, to be open to it. And then the third thing that was surprising for me is people were saying, oh, this work that we're learning around relationship dynamics and psychology and bias and story, I could use this in my family. I should use this in my dynamics in my personal life, because we're not taught how to navigate differences in general. And then we definitely aren't taught how to have healthy relationships across the board. That's something people learn through trial and error, and then maybe personal development and therapy and whatever other choices you make. But people are like, wow, I might take these tools around microaggressions and conflict de-escalation and narrative making and use this in my personal life. And I wish people could see this outside of a moderation role, because this is something you can do whether you're a moderator or not. So I think those three things were really interesting. And then we had Stanford University evaluate the work, and they saw that people changed their behavior for 6 months past the course on the platform. So we were seeing real change behavior over time. So for me, it's the small tweaks, giving people tools on how you can show up slightly differently in terms of questions, conversation, communication tactics, storytelling tactics. And it feels accessible in a way that anybody of any background can do it. All those things were really powerful. And it gave me hope that this sort of bigger societal work we're doing around our relationship dynamics, our group dynamics, can change, because we have never successfully had a multiracial society. We've never successfully had a multiracial democracy. And our microcosms of group dynamics are a reflection of that. And so I think people being able to come into groups and be, accountable, positive, proactive, and trying to create better outcomes was really inspirational for me and really hopeful, because I think often people are like, this work doesn't matter. People don't care about it. They hate it. It's reactionary. It's a check on the box. And all that can definitely be true. But I think most people, if you ask them, do you want to have healthy, trusting relationships with people and be able to, engage with and communicate with anyone? Most people would say, yeah. I think most people want that skill, but they don't realize that this work that's been shamed and falsely maligned is a way to get there.
It's like really, it's been really, it's scary. There is a point where there has been some real fear, especially for people doing DEI work. Am I going to have to do it tomorrow? Are we really taking it seriously? What's going to be the overall impact, or not being able to see things go to fruition? How have you been able to, I don't want to say make the business case, but when things come up, or if there's been a fear of pushback for DEI, what have you been able to do to help people stay positive if they feed another story about why this is maybe a bad choice?
I've always positioned this work as change management work and leadership work. And I think people are always open to that because leadership's never going to go away, the function of it. But baking in DEI principles makes you an effective leader. Not doing that means you will not be an effective leader. And I think when people realize that it's just a best case skill to collaboration, innovation, problem solving, managing groups and conflicts that might come up in it, they're open to it. So I just bake it in as a best practice. The interpersonal communication that we have and the ways that DEI can help us to have better outcomes makes people more open. I think if it's anything that's been a little bit more punitive, so people who come in saying like, hey, we really messed up. Our culture is jacked. We are trying to course correct. Those people tend to have a bigger struggle with committing to this because they see DEI as a separate function and not a core function of a good business organization. And I typically don't tend to work with those clients that much because they're not committing to longer term work or behavior change work. Because a lot of my programming, it's courses and workshops and coaching. It's a full program that you go through to create longer term behavior change versus just a one-off thing. So those organizations were never committed to begin with, like even before this moment, in 2020, which I called the Black Rush, because everyone was like, Black people, help us, save us.
Right.
We're learning about these things. And I was getting so many emails, and there was kind of a 50-50 split of people who were like, we need to do this one big thing one time so that we don't look bad in public and so we don't get sued. And those people, I was like, this is not a good idea. It's not a good decision. It's not going to change much. It might actually create more harm. And I would turn them down versus people who are like, you know what? We're really interested in building a healthy culture and measuring that. We're really interested in incorporating equity principles into all of our business goals. How do we do that? We're really interested in upskilling people's leadership skills before they are in leadership positions. How do we do that? And that's where this work is more effective, and where it lies is like this longer term behavior change work that is just doing good business versus I got to do this because I'm afraid of the public. It's like, yeah, that's not going to last anyways. And so we're in that moment now where people are afraid, and the ones who are backtracking saw this as a glamour kind of performative thing, similar to what we've seen in the environmental sustainability portion of business work, where people are like, I'm a greenwash this and that, so I don't get in trouble with the public. And then as soon as it gets a little challenging, they roll back their sustainability commitments. And I need people to make and connect the dots and understand that whatever choices you're making in your business, whether they're for the right reasons or not, do have an impact. And if you aren't committing to longer term change, you're probably creating more harm.
Right, Katee, I've been monopolizing the conversation, so I don't want you to, I'm sorry.
No. I'm listening. I'm just fascinated. So, I love this concept of just baking stuff in, because I think that's also something that, being in HR, we have so many of these compliance trainings that we have folks do. And so when, HR is introducing DEI training, they go, oh, this is just another compliance thing, versus no, this is just part of leadership training. This is part of being a good team member. This is, part of just being a part of this group or this team or whatever you want to call it. So, I think that's the part that also I love that you called that out, because I think that's just such an important piece to the puzzle that people don't think about. I would love to shift a little bit and just talk about, the uproar or the thoughts that you might have on the Olympics and the opening ceremony and all of the kind of.
Oh, I loved it. Loved it. Love the ceremony. 10 tens across the board.
Yes, yes.
That was like the best one I've ever seen. It was so, I don't know. I liked it.
You know, it's funny. So I caught it at the end. So I got home from like a dinner or something, turned on the TV, and I think the first thing I saw was the masked guy that was carrying the torch. He's running all through the city on the roofs, and I'm like, "What's going on? Who stole the torch?" I'm like, "What's happening?" Because I had no context. And so I'm watching this. I'm like, "Okay, now they've got this cool little still horse going down the scene, and then they have like these dancers with fireworks." And then I got to see Celine. And I'm like, "Oh, this is getting good." So I ended up going online, and I saw the outrage, the evangelical claim that this was disrespectful to the Last Supper because of the fashion show that happened. And it was really actually the Greek Dionysus dinner. So they
Yeah.
were, missing cultural references. But this is why equity is important. DEI actually helps people to expand the set of stories that they know about culture and history so that they can respond to change and difference more accurately, right? If people had a more accurate picture of French history, they would know that all of the art and all of the performance art across the city was an expression of their history, how they fought against aristocracy, how they just fought against a really extreme right-wing group recently, and why they're celebrating inclusivity and genuinely all the different demographic expressions of French people. And that's what the whole story was about. And so I was like, oh, this makes sense now that people were confused because they didn't have that historical context, they didn't have that cultural context, and they think the world revolves around the US. Sorry, y'all, it doesn't. They weren't even thinking about us. They were like, this is cute. We're going to try to celebrate Marie Antoinette, and her beheading with metal music as a marrying to it, which was, really interesting. I also went and watched part of the documentary about how it was made afterwards. It's on Peacock. And it was interesting to hear that they were like, we really want people to see that we want to celebrate what makes France different. And we have to look at everybody who's a French person, and regardless of disability or sexual expression, gender identity, race. So I think they did an incredible job. Now, as a viewer, if you were there in person on the river, that might have been a little challenging because it was raining and all you could see was the boats going by, and you only saw the performances on a little like jumbotron. It was definitely made for TV first, and I think the TV experience was incredible. But being in person, I would have been a little mad. I would have been a little tight. If I was sitting there in the rain, I'm like, we can't even see nothing because it's spread across
No,
the city.
yes. But the thing is, even when the rain, like I did love just going back and looking at the highlights too of like all of the cool things, and then all of the meaning of all of it actually, because I didn't know a lot of those references either. So to be able to see, oh, that's not a horse of the apocalypse. That's actually, whoever. And, some of these things that were just so ridiculous now, like, oh, okay. And again, to your point, guess what, folks? It's not all about Christianity, and it's not all about the United States. It's weird.
That's also why it's such a great muscle to build, because I tell people and so one of the things I talk about is narrative intelligence. So that's understanding how story affects bias, belief, and behavior, and also being aware of your internal stories as well as external. And this response, so people who have a more amplified response to change and difference typically have a stronger reaction in their amygdala. They think it's literally a threat. And that can lead to so many inaccuracies and missteps. And then you're missing out on really great collaboration, conversation, creativity, and innovation when you are always jumping to the worst case story or the worst case scenario about what's happening. And so I think that's an important reminder here where it's like, wait, let's take a beat. Let's not jump to the most derogatory stereotype story I associate with this event. What are other things that could explain it? Let's expand the set of narratives that we know about this thing before we make a decision, before we say something. And that process, slowing that down for people, because it's an automatic process and it's one based in fear and one based in survival, is such a big part of the work. Because I think when people slow that process down and don't jump to a stereotype and then jump to anger and fear, they're more likely to be able to have better conversation and collaboration. And now how much energy do we waste explaining stuff to people and reducing their ire and anger, when that could have been spent having better conversation and dialogue about what this means and what it inspired? I don't think people also know the cost of bias and the cost of distrust. And it's literally stalled innovation. It keeps us from solving problems. It doesn't help us to get to the safety that we want, because when we have lots of distrust, it's very hard to feel safe. So it doesn't fix anything. It just slows everything down and makes it worse. So people who are defaulting into that pattern out of fear are actually creating more instability in their lives and more unsafe conditions than they are actually creating that stability and security that they're craving. So I hope people learn from these moments where they're like, yeah, it's okay to take a beat. It's okay to not always attack and try to police and control the things you don't understand. Maybe take a beat to try to understand it first.
And also get a passport and travel and actually go experience. Hey, you're muted, so you can't yell at me right now.
I can.
Get a passport and go travel would be my other, I think it's fascinating because I think that's the other piece is that if you start to go look in other countries and other places and start to see all of the differences, it also just opens your eyes. And to your point, the exhaustion of just having to go, let me defend this thing that really isn't mine to defend, but the ignorance is so startling that you're like, why does it always have to be about you? But B, why does it always have to be the worst story?
When you see it, you say, oh, that's something new.
Right.
I wonder what that is, like leading with curiosity. Like, and I'll click it one step further. What if it was the Last Supper? Like, why don't you just accept that maybe somebody sees something in a way different than you and try to find out more about what.
Jackye, I did hear or see one comment that was like, let's be really clear, the French would never highlight an Italian artist.
That's right. That's hilarious.
That's very accurate and true. I believe that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it also points to something I talk about often in my trainings is this idea of a culture of autopilot versus a culture of curiosity, because autopilot is immediate assumptions, stereotypes, fear when you are confronted with change and difference. But a culture of curiosity is you stop and ask questions first. And so the questions might help you to assume or get to a point of, oh, actually, this is unsafe and we need to do something about it. Or it might be like, oh, I've learned something new. This is different. This is
Right.
interesting. Let's see what I can explore. And to build on to what you were saying about the passport, a lot of people don't necessarily have the income to travel, but even if you don't, books and stories and narrative, podcasts, movies are an incredible way to travel and experience other people. There's a concept called narrative transport, which means when you are listening to a story, you experience it as if it's firsthand. And so that's a really great way to explore other cultures and experiences and ideas when you expand the set of stories that you're consuming. And so I tell people often, do a story audit, expand what you're listening to, reading, watching, and curating. And that can make you more creative. It makes you more interesting in conversations. It helps you to relate to people who are different. There's lots of groups and places I've never been, but I can damn sure look them up and learn about them. I don't even have to necessarily get on a plane. And that's the first time in human history we've had this much information at our fingertips, where before it was just through maybe the leader of your community, the parishioner, their churchgoer, or whatever. So we're at a really incredible time of there's not an excuse to not expose yourself to new ideas. You have so much ease of access to information. It's just feeling like it's a priority and it's something that's beneficial to you. I think there are people who have learned not doing new things, not being exposed to difference makes them safer. And I fundamentally disagree. I think that actually creates a lot of instability and why we're facing so many problems.
I want to take a break real quick just to let you know about a new show we've just added to the network. Up Next at Work, hosted by Gene and Katee of the Devon Group. Fantastic show. If you're looking for something that pushes the norm, pushes the boundaries, has some really spirited conversations, Google Up Next at Work, Gene and Katee from the Devon Group.
Agreed.
I appreciate that. That is really smart because that's what I've seen so often. I live in Waco, Texas. My mother-in-law is here in Waco, Texas. It is the home of Dr. Pepper. That's a fun fact. We were in New York City and they went and asked for a Dr. Pepper, like at McDonald's. And they were like, we don't have Dr. Pepper, but we have root beer. So then it was like two things, like number one, why don't you have Dr. Pepper? And number two, why are you suggesting that root beer is even a close second to Dr. Pepper? It was like, it's a brown soda. That's not Coke. And she fell. Then we go to the next place and she knows, and I'm not going to ask for Dr. Pepper. So I'm going to ask for sweet tea. Again, we're in the Northeast and could not wrap the brain around and then immediately wants to go home. And how many times have we where that is the opportunity of learning and expanding so that you can get, go someplace and have that mindset. I don't know.
The caveat to that, I will say, Jackye, is when we've been traveling somewhere like in Vietnam, when we were there for about 2.5 weeks, we did go to McDonald's, and it was literally, I just need something I understand and know. And all the food there was phenomenal. And then we found like a Mexican restaurant in no man's land in Vietnam, which was also hilarious. But McDonald's is always your go-to if you can't find what you need,
I always ordered pad thai. I was in Barcelona and ordered pad thai. And my husband was like, what are you doing?
What is
You're
happening?
literally in Spain. Like, where are the tapas? I was like, I don't know. It was a panic situation. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It brings up a thought for me too. This idea, it's a false belief that ignoring differences in change means that they go away. Because the only thing guaranteed in life is change. We're constantly changing. I mean, change is inevitable. It's a part of the law of nature. Things are always changing and regenerating and dying and birthing. And so there's no resistance to that. And I think when people get a healthier relationship to uncertainty and change, they can have a healthier relationship to other people. And I think that's the main struggle most humans have, is how they react to uncertainty is deep fear and deep anger. And it's like, well, if it's uncertain and different, take a beat. Let's get some information first so we can make informed decisions instead of knee-jerk reactions that lead to just more instability and more harm.
But I think that's also, you're spot on. And I think that's also the way that the media and certain folks prey on people that are uninformed. It is, let me tell you all the bad things about this thing, why we don't want to have any progressive ideas or new types of jobs that we haven't had before, or move away from coal, or, any of these things. The fear factor, Jackye and I've talked about this a lot, of the, you assume positive intent, but also have to understand the impact of your words. And I think that's the piece that's most frustrating right now, is the impact of the words that people are using and the way they're talking about progress and innovation and where we need to go to keep the United States at the forefront of so many things. It is like, well, no, we either have to go back to the 1800s, or that's it. We're all going to die and it's all over.
Delete all the human rights. It's like, no, you can't do that.
No, exactly.
Right. But it's also this interesting idea that, like, I think a lot of people tend to struggle with the concept that we're in a time period where whatever myths and narratives that we make can explode pretty quickly. And a lot of that is a distraction. And I think they don't realize that people in positions of power who want to hoard as much resources as possible have an incentive to create myths that are untrue and to blame your problems on others, quote unquote, or people who are the enemy, quote unquote, as threat, to distract you from the reality of them taking your resources. And that's been a strategy that's been used for centuries. And there's like lots of really great books about this, and the zero-sum games that have been created in economic and political policy. So it's a distraction. It's a very old narrative making strategy. And sometimes I'm like, I wish people would just come up with new oppressive tactics. It's getting kind of boring and predictable at this point. Like, razzle dazzle us with your bigotry at this point. You've been using the same old shtick over and over again, like the immigrants are taking your things, the transgender, whatever enemy or group that they're pinpointing, when in fact, if you follow the money, you follow the policy, it is a very small percentage of privileged elite people, typically owner class or, very wealthy individuals who are making circumstances harder for a lot of people. So I'm like, it's a distraction.
Since before the slave trade. But then you also see that, like, if we actually get together, then people are going to take over. Like, if we actually see ourselves as being able to partner and we don't other each other, what's going to happen? And it is amazing that we are still seeing that. And I think that's why, like the past week or some of the things that we've been seeing lately has been so amazing, because you're seeing a slight shift. Can that happen forever? I don't know, but it is good to see a different outcome than what we've seen in the past over and over and over. So that is positive, and I hope it starts the beginning of new narratives and new stories.
I think people are seeing, there's really great people who've written about this before me, but the cost of white supremacy and sexism and all the isms is on everybody, and I think that's the thing people are realizing, like, oh, this is bad for everybody. So this isn't good for anyone. So why should we uphold it? Why should we protect it? And people are getting close to literally almost losing their rights to vote in democracy. And they're like, well, maybe we should fight back a little bit. I'm like, you shouldn't have to get to this point of extreme.
Right.
But if what it takes for people to see that the systems around us isn't just you work hard enough and you pick yourself up by your bootstraps and you'll win the game and you'll be fine. It's rigged against most people, regardless of what they look like. And so when people recognize that and see that we need to build new systems, new ways that we relate, how we set goals, how we make stuff, how we share resources, I think people are waking up to that. It's been through pretty significant social unrest, the pandemic, our climate change issues, now our political instability. I think this is shaking people and waking them up that these systems need to change. And we all have a contribution to creating that change or not.
Absolutely. And I think that's the piece that also has been really cool to see. And all of these groups that have come together and, the last week and a half, my hope is that it continues and that there isn't some derailment. That is my biggest worry, is that there's going to be some sort of derailment. But I think, the momentum is going such a way that people are going, oh, wait, this does impact me. This does impact my world versus those other people over there that I don't need to worry about. And it's like, how did you not see this already? All of the things that we've seen happening with the Supreme Court, with all of these different issues. It's like, no, this impacts all of us and our kids and nieces and nephews and everybody else. So anyhow, so I want to ask, what is one thing you want to make sure, I know we just jumped around a little bit, but what's one thing you want folks to hear in your message and, make sure that they take away from what we've talked about?
The concept that everybody has a leadership story. I think that we all have these big inflection moments of our lives where we are expressing our best skills and our values. And then the stories we tell around those things become tools for us to lead and to motivate and inspire people towards goals. And so I talk a lot about how to discover that leadership story for yourself and to define it for yourself, because most people, receive messages from society through media, education, institutions that they're not good enough or enough of something in some way and shouldn't take up space, shouldn't have a voice, shouldn't have decision-making authority. And I think when people flip that on its head and realize that leadership is a practice of story making around goals, and we all have a leadership story of some sort that can inspire and help others, we can move things forward. I think we're seeing that right now with the organizing that's happening at this collective level between all these coalitions. People really feel like, oh, I have a story to tell. I have insights and skills I can share. We have a shared narrative we can create together. And I think it really comes from, people understanding that leadership is practice and that we need new models of it so that every person feels empowered to make change and to express their values in the things that they make, in the conversations they have, and the ways that they manage their relationships. So if people, listeners, take anything away, it's like you have extreme amounts of power in what you believe about your own leadership capability and how you express that in the stories you tell about the things you care about. And when you could do that in an effective way, you will build power in ways you didn't expect. And I think more people, if they become storytellers of their own lives and the ways that they create, visions and goals, they're going to create changes they didn't think were possible.
Awesome. Jackye?
Anyway, I was just hoping for some reason that you were going to.
I thought you were going to just say ditto, because I'm just going to say ditto to what Tina said.
I have another one.
Okay, go.
Well, I think that what I want people to start learning is that narrative intelligence, and when they're going into these things, lead with curiosity and see where the story came from, and recognize that Katee knows I don't see positive intent. I'm always assuming negative intent. I'm working on it with my therapist. I'll get there. Pray for me. But what I want people to think about is understanding that this is a story or a narrative that has a background in history as well, and not learn to not take it as fact or as personal. I understand there's probably a story behind that, so that you can lead with more curiosity instead of feeling like it's necessarily bad or an attack on you, especially at work when we're all trying to reach those same goals. It's difficult to separate those
Yes, exactly.
things.
And I think
Katie K.
for me, it's the framing of kind of that evolution or that change that we all need to have to be able to ask those questions and be curious and learn other people's stories and really understand, kind of exactly what you all are saying, but also that mindset shift that every person has to make of, I have a story, but also the person sitting across from me has a story. And I want to learn that as well. It's not just, let me tell you what I know or what I have experienced or what I have gone through, being able to really listen and take that stuff in. So I love the idea though of, changing kind of the mindsets, changing the behaviors through storytelling. I just think that's such a great concept. So Christina, where can folks find you?
They can find me in Brooklyn, or actually online. You can find me at thenewquo.com. That's THENEWQUO.com. You can also find me on Instagram and LinkedIn at just my full name, Christina Blacken. And yeah, I have lots of resources, courses, things you can sign up for to learn more about how to find your leadership story and learn more about that. And I'm just excited to see more and more people seeing this work as a lifetime work for better relationships, because that's really what the goal is how do we have healthier relationships with people, particularly who are different from us, and we all have a way of being able to do that. It doesn't take someone who's a super special, like famous person or celebrity or very wealthy to do this work. All of us can do it, and it just takes small steps and commitments.
Absolutely. Although Christina, I do have a lot of very special people that I work with. But maybe in a different way than what you mean.
Right.
Well, Christina, thank you so much for joining us. This is Katee Van Horn.
And this is Jackye Clayton.
Bye.
Bye.